Now it's on.
This is my Matryoshka.
Show it to the camera so we can see it on there. All right, so we're going to have to practice first, knowing who's inside, who are all the different people in there.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see.
Lemon.
You're going to open it up for us?
Who's the big guy?
Who's the big guy?
Uh-huh.
Do you remember?
No.
No, he's Putin.
Putin.
Yeah, he's still around. Okay.
He's Putin.
All right.
Putin.
Let's open him up.
Titan.
Okay, do you remember who the little one is?
No.
Inside?
No.
No? Okay. Well, we're going to practice so you remember. This is Lenin.
Lenin.
Okay? So the little one is...
Around?
He's still around. The little one is...
Lenin.
Okay,
Lenin.
And he promised people 3 things. Okay? Do you know what they are?
No.
He promised them peace. He promised them land. And he promised them bread. What are the things he promised them?
Bread.
Yeah, what else?
That's all.
That's all just bread? What about the peace and the land?
The peace and the land.
All right, so peace, land, bread. Say it.
Peace, land, bread.
All right. So we've got Lenin. Then?
We don't want Lenin to lose.
After Lenin?
Lenin looks big in there.
We get...
What? Let me see it, Lenin.
You want to see him big?
Lenin is a big guy.
Okay. Now?
He's a big guy.
We get to our next one. So this is...
Putin.
Gutenberg? No, what did Gutenberg do? He did what?
Made books.
You're right.
He made books.
You're right, he made books. This is...
Gutenberg.
Stalin. Can you say Stalin?
Stalin Gutenberg.
There he is. And we're going to talk more about Stalin today.
Today is a Stalin day.
And then the next
Stalin's
one...
still around?
No. None of these guys are around. Only Putin. Only the one on the outside. And then this one is...
Bored.
Khrushchev.
Khrushchev has cruise ship.
He sounds like cruise ship. Khrushchev, we'll talk about later. Not today. Then, this one we won't really talk about at all.
Because what's his
Brezhnev.
Brezhnev.
And do you remember the last one, the big one? Who's still around today?
No.
Who we said this is?
No. Bald hair Uncle Boor.
Bald hair. This is Putin. All right, so let's do the video now, and we'll practice later and see if Joaquin remembers. All right, here we go with today's lesson, moving as quick as possible so we can get this done, but also slow as possible for you to understand what the main ideas are. Be safe, be healthy. Sending good vibes to you and your family. Start this unit strong. Did you finish the first 2 tasks of this unit? We'll talk about that in a minute. Keep up the hard work. I know that this seems like it's a long time you've been doing this, and we still got a long way to go. If we keep moving forward together, we'll get to the end of this all together. Here's the Cold War assignments that you should have done so far. You did Cold War task number 1. You wrote about the United Nations. Cold War task number 2, you wrote about the Iron Curtain or the Cold War. Cold War task number 3 is today's task, which will be multiple choice. And you have a guided reading that is due next week, and we're using a new format for this guided reading, so we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, let's talk about the title of this guided reading, Superpowers Face Off. What do we mean when we say superpower? In this context, we're talking about an extremely powerful nation. Not superpowers like a superhero or a supervillain or a magician might have, but extremely powerful countries such as the United States and the Soviet Union, which were rival superpowers, extremely powerful nations during the Cold War. All right, so here's that new guided reading format. Based on feedback that you guys have given me, the Google Docs have been difficult to use, particularly if you are using a tablet or a smartphone to complete the task. So we made a Google form instead. So the Google form is there. So you'll read the section of the textbook just like normal. You've got it at home in your text booklet, or you can read the attached PDF. Respond to the questions in the form. If you don't want to do the form, you can still use the old PDF with Cami. I know some of you have been doing that. You can still handwrite it on the worksheet you have at home and take a picture of it. I know some of you are still doing that, but I think this is going to be a much easier format for you than what we were doing before. So instead of having to edit a doc, you just type your answers into the appropriate spot in the Google form. When you're all done with it, you click submit. I receive it. I check your work. You get credit for the work that you've done. And again, it's easier to do it in this format on a phone or a tablet versus editing the Google Doc. So that's why we changed it. All right, today's aim. How did the United States attempt to limit the influence of the Soviet Union in order to contain the spread of communism in Europe? So here's a little review and a little prediction of what's happening today, or preview, I should say. So during World War II, the Soviet Union and the United States were friends. They were allies. They fought on the same side of the war together, winning the war to defeat Nazi Germany and later Japan. But that ends. After World War II, we begin a new phase called the Cold War, in which these two countries are no longer friends, they are rivals. So the Soviet Union wants to grow its strength, it wants to expand its influence, it wants to spread its ideas, specifically communism. The United States does not like that, so they want to contain communism to stop it from spreading, so the United States can grow its power and influence by spreading its ideas, its beliefs, building up its alliances. All right, so here's a review. We're going to go back to World War I again. I know we talked about this before. This is very, very important to go over again. Here's our review. What were the short-term effects of World War I in Europe, particularly in Germany? So you're thinking about the war itself was very destructive. You're thinking about the Treaty of Versailles, which sought to punish Germany. So the economy was ruined from the war. In all of Europe was extremely damaged because that's where the war was fought. There was high unemployment and hyperinflation, meaning money was worthless, especially in Germany. So Germany got the worst of it, not just because of the damage from the war, but the way they were punished in the Treaty of Versailles. What were the long-term effects of World War I then? Well, based on these problems, based on how Germany was punished, this led to the rise of Hitler, the rise of the Nazi Party, the rise of fascism, including fascism in Italy as well because of the economic problems there. Ultimately, all of those things lead to World War II because Hitler's actions took things to the brink of war, to the point where the Western Allies finally said, we have to fight a war against this country to stop them. Could these short and long-term effects have been avoided? If so, how? So people will say, well, maybe World War II was not necessary. What if Germany had not been punished so harshly? Maybe their economy would have recovered a little bit sooner. And then Hitler would not have had the ability to sort of feed off of that as an opportunity to increase his power. Additionally, what if the U.S. had decided to help out after the war rather than allowing Germany to be punished and suffer? After all, the U.S. was not physically damaged by the war because the war took place in Europe. So the U.S. obviously lost many lives, not as much as the other countries though, and did not suffer the same damage to their cities and such. For example, this is a photo of Warsaw. This is after World War II, so you can see just how destructive the war was, not just on the human lives that were lost, but in terms of people, in terms of the structural damage. So a lot of death, a lot of destruction creates economic problems. So after the war, this is just one example to reference here. In the winter of 1947, so World War II is done, thousands protested in West Germany against the disastrous food situation. The sign that is being held up there says, "We want coal, we want bread." And when you hear bread, you should be thinking, this is similar. We've talked about bread before with Lenin promising the people of Russia peace, land, and bread. When people want bread, they are more willing to listen to anyone who is going to promise to give it to them. So West Germany is one of those places that's saying, hey, we want bread. Our economy is suffering. So if you look at the map here, West Germany, which we'll talk about in another lesson, how it got divided into East and West. West Germany is part of the West, part of the U.S. allies, and the eastern side of Germany and the eastern part of Europe is part of that Eastern Bloc. Remember this political cartoon from before. The Eastern Bloc was communist. They were Soviet allies. The Soviets were supporting them. The Soviets wanted to expand their influence. So you can almost think of Stalin in this political cartoon as coming to these countries that are in need after the destruction of the war and saying, bread, anyone? Does anyone need bread? We'll help you out. You just have to be communist. You just have to be our ally, right? So how is the U.S. going to feel about that? They are trying to remain strong as well. So here's the discussion we usually have in class. Much of Western Europe lay in ruins after World War II, just like Eastern Europe. There was also economic turmoil, a scarcity of jobs and food. You are the leader of a great superpower, meaning extremely powerful nation, one of two in the world. To keep the balance of power in your nation's favor, you want to gain as many allies as possible. Which action or policy would be most effective for gaining allies? Should you send troops to support that country? Should you join together with those countries in an alliance? Should you support anti-communist rebels, meaning should you support specific people in that country that are against communism and thus against the Soviet Union and Stalin? Or should you give economic aid? Should you give money to those countries? Think about what those countries need. They have been destroyed. They're in economic turmoil. Troops might help, an alliance might help, supporting anti-communism might help, but really is not going to feed them, okay? They want money, right? They want to be provided for first before they worry about what kind of government or what kind of alliances they have. Reminds me of a couple of songs. One of them is very old. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called Money. That's What I Want. A more recent example, although probably still very old to you kids watching this video, Wu-Tang Clan said, cash rules everything around me, right? So money is probably going to be the best solution in this case. So let's assume that you would give economic aid. You would give money to these countries. A couple of follow-up questions to consider. Which countries would you give aid to? For example, if the country is receiving aid from the Soviet Union, would you help them? Or are you only going to help your allies? Is it just open to everyone who needs help? Allies only? What requirements would you have or expectations would you have of the countries that were receiving the aid? Are you going to say, look, if we're giving you this money, we're not just giving it to you. Perhaps we're going to say you have to be a capitalist country like us. Or perhaps we're going to say you must be a democracy like us. And if you're not a democracy, you need to switch to being a democracy. Or maybe we're going to say you must spend the money buying U.S. products. So the U.S. government will give you money, but you've got to buy stuff from U.S. companies so it helps us. So it's a win-win, right? We'll give you some money to help you out, but you'll buy stuff from our companies to help us out. All right, so here's what happens. Here's our vocabulary. First, the big picture for today and the big picture through the entire Cold War is this idea of containment. The United States wants to try to stop the spread of containment so that they can increase their power and weaken the power of the Soviet Union. So they're trying to stop the spread of communism after World War II by creating alliances and helping weak countries. They're going to help countries that are weak, that might be willing to listen to the Soviet Union, saying, hey, want some bread? So the US says we need to help in order for them to be able to resist communism. And that's going to be huge throughout the entirety of the Cold War. So that leads to this doctrine or policy called the Truman Doctrine. It's named after US President Truman. The U.S. gave economic and military aid to free nations that were threatened by internal or external opponents. So they're helping out those countries, whether there's someone in the country trying to overthrow the government to create a communist country, or if it's outside influence such as the Soviet Union, the United States is going to help those countries. And that leads to a very specific action, which is the Marshall Plan, which is a term that has come up more recently in the news lately, and I'll explain how in a moment. The Marshall Plan. So after World War II, the United States gave economic aid to European countries that needed to rebuild. So Europe had been destroyed. They needed to rebuild. The U.S. said, we will help you do that. Here's some money to help you rebuild. This has come up a lot lately because some people have said, look, we did that to help Europe. Perhaps now there are other parts of the world that the U.S. could benefit from helping. So, for example, a Marshall Plan for Latin America. If the United States was to help those countries build up economically, it would help them, it would help us, it would help with some of the issues that we're having in our country in terms of immigration, employment, things like that. So you may have heard that come up. A presidential candidate, Julian Castro, talked a lot about that when he was running for president. He is no longer in the running, though, for that. All right, let's go back through these one more time. Let's talk a little bit about containment. Maybe you're familiar with the Container Store. All they do is sell containers to keep things inside of, right? So after World War II, think about those containers. The United States wanted to contain the spread of communism. They wanted to keep communism in a container. If it's already in these boxes, if it's already in the Soviet Union, it's already in Poland, for example, at that point, it's already in East Germany, let's at least contain it, keep it in that container, stop it from spreading more. So before the war, the United States was practicing isolationism. They were saying, you know what? The beginning of World War II, it's not our problem. We are hands off. Other countries are not our problem. After the war, though, when they're practicing containment, the U.S. is very hands-on, saying, we are going to get very involved in these other countries, and we're going to make sure that they can resist the spread of communism. We're going to make it our problem to make sure that they can resist that. Here's some political cartoons to go along with demonstrating that idea of resisting communism. So, in this cartoon, we have Western Europe, which is the area we're focusing on today. Western Europe needs help, right? So, in this cartoon, Vulture, labeled communism, is bringing a baby named Chaos. And you can see that the Chaos baby is even holding this tool, kind of reminds me of industrialization that was happening in Eastern Europe. So the Soviet Union, Stalin, communism are going to Western Europe. They're going to bring chaos to it. Right? That's the baby that's going to be born in that house is chaos, unless U.S. Congress, which is here labeled, the doctor is labeled as U.S. Congress, can get there first. So the top it says step on it, doc. So meaning that the United States Congress has this duty or obligation to try to race to help Western Europe before communism gets there to deliver this chaos to Western Europe. All right, looking specifically at the Marshall Plan. So we have Europe. Europe is riding a bicycle, and the American taxpayer is helping Europe learn how to ride this bicycle. The bicycle that they're riding is the Marshall Plan. So the Marshall Plan is kind of like giving them a bike, We got to help them use it so that hopefully they can find their way to self-support. So after they've learned how to ride the bicycle, they don't need help from the American taxpayer. They don't need U.S. money anymore. They'll be able to ride the bike on their own. They'll be able to use all the things that the U.S. has helped them build. That's what the Marshall Plan was about, helping them rebuild. All right, so the United States spent a lot of money helping their allies in the West. You can see these bars on the map. It's kind of like a map/bar graph. Great Britain and France got a lot of help. West Germany as well, and other Western allies got help from the U.S. The Eastern Bloc, those are the Soviet allies, they did not get any help from the United States. The label that you see here was the Marshall Plan aid packages were labeled with this. So you can actually see in this photo, these are goods that were sent to Greece, which was one of the recipients of aid under the Marshall Plan. And you can see these boxes are even labeled with that Marshall Aid label for European recovery supplied by the United States of America. You can see it again here. There's construction happening in West Berlin, which was technically part of West Germany. It's construction that happened with the aid of the Marshall Plan, so they used that money to rebuild in the city of West Berlin. And the sign that's on the wall there says Emergency Program Berlin with the help of the Marshall Plan. So the Marshall Plan helped feed many people, providing them goods, helped Europe rebuild. One more look at a propaganda poster promoting the Marshall Plan. You can see all these flags of all the countries that were receiving aid under the Marshall Plan on a windmill. And a windmill creates energy, right? When every fan in the windmill is moving together. So this idea of working together, right? Building energy. Energy is an important industrial resource. And then if you look at behind the windmill, the Marshall Plan label appears, and it's labeling the tail of the windmill, which helps the windmill move in the right direction. If you don't have that tail, the windmill is just going to spin the wrong way. It's not actually going to generate any electricity, right? But in this case, the Marshall Plan is there symbolically guiding the windmill so it moves together so that all of Europe can rebuild and become stronger together. All right, so here's today's task. You're going to read this article about the Marshall Plan. There's a photo of Marshall himself, and you'll respond to some multiple choice questions. So you'll answer the questions in the Google form. After you've done that, you will click on Submit. We'll receive your response. After we've received all of the responses, we'll check your work. You'll find out your grade a little bit later. So be very careful to answer the questions as correctly as possible, right? Closing out, don't forget, hope you're safe, hope you're healthy, start strong, finish strong. That's the big picture right now. We're in the middle of this marking period. Let's stay strong through the middle so we can have a strong finish at the end of it all. Let's get back to Joaquin, see what he remembers about the Matryoshka Russian nesting dolls we were checking out at the beginning. Thanks. Okay, we're back. We're going to see if Joaquin remembers the people. Do you remember who this one is? No? All right, let's start at the inside then.
Lenin.
Yeah, you're right. What did he promise?
Land.
Yeah, what else?
Bread.
Uh-huh. And peace.
And peace.
Very good. Okay. And next up, who's this one? Do you remember this one? No? Mm-hmm. Just Lenin? That's the only one you remember? This one is Stalin.
Stalin.
Okay.
Stalin. Stalin.
Do you remember this one?
Crew.
Oh, pretty good. Khrushchev.
Khrushchev.
Okay. This one I said isn't going to be as important. Do you remember this one?
No.
No. Brezhnev.
Brezhnev.
And on the outside, last one is?
Neverev.
Putin.
Putin.
All right, so there we go. You did pretty good with the first one. The first one again is?
Lenin.
And he promised?
Peace and bread.
And? Oh, good. And then this one?
Mem.
All right. We'll cut it off there. Thanks for joining us. Be safe, be healthy, and peace. Land.
Bread.